Did you know that adoption laws vary state by state and they can be horribly confusing? In fact, in the state of Nevada, you are allowed to self-match, but yet you have to work with an agency. I know, horribly confusing, right? Well, lucky for us, today we're having a conversation with Kim Surratt, who is an adoption attorney in the state of Nevada. She's going to walk us through the process and all the confusing nuances, just like that one, in our conversation. Before we dive into our conversation with Kim, let me take just a minute to introduce myself if we haven't met yet. My name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom on a mission to reduce overwhelm and unnecessary expense for hopeful adoptive families. I do this by providing you resources like this and step-by-step guidance through the adoption process so that you can match faster. If you haven't already done so, I sure would appreciate it if you take just a minute to smash that subscribe button and hit that like so that YouTube knows that you found this content valuable and that they'll share it more often. All right, I am so excited to welcome Kim to the show so that she can help us understand more about adoption law in the state of Nevada. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited you're here.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Anytime we get to talk about adoption, I'm happy.
Awesome. Me too. We'll be great fast friends. Can you share a little bit more about yourself with the audience so they can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. These are weird conversations these days because I now can say I've been practicing law for 20 years.
Congratulations.
It makes me feel old, but I just hit the double decade. But yes, I've been practicing law for 20 years now. I started in family law 19 years ago. I did not last. I was in insurance defense before that, but obviously that only lasted 1 year of my career before I moved on to family law. So I have my own firm. I opened it in 2007. So that's also been trudging along for a lot of years. And I've been lobbying since 2004. So barely into my legal career, I started lobbying. And I've lobbied a significant amount of things in the state of Nevada, all surrounding adoption, assisted reproduction, family law too. I mean, we don't have anybody to defend the bigger picture of family law, but some very, very specific items within adoption and assisted reproduction.
Awesome. Yeah, we should probably touch on assisted reproduction as well throughout this episode. I didn't really think about that as we were kind of preparing, but we can definitely talk about that too. So before we dive into assisted reproduction, I'd love if we just kind of focus on adoption law in particular and open up our conversation just with a general understanding or overview of what adoption law is like in the state of Nevada. Again, we have, folks in our audience that are just starting out to those that may have been waiting for a while, but I'd like them to have just an understanding of the process from your perspective.
Well, we've made some significant changes in Nevada law over literally about the past decade. We started making some tweaks and changes. We're hoping to rewrite our entire adoption chapter at some point. So it's a little more user-friendly. I would like it where people can kind of go in and almost do their adoptions on their own, be able to read it and understand the procedures. Unfortunately, we're not quite there yet. But Nevada, the changes we've made it easier to have an adoption in the state of Nevada. So you don't have to, the petitioners, the adoptive parents don't have to reside in the state to have the petition filed in this state. The child could have been here, but placed with them in another state, but we can still complete the adoption here. That has changed adoption in Nevada dramatically. It's made it a lot smoother. We still have some timeframes that we need to look at where, like, if the child's been gone for 5 years, Nevada no longer has jurisdiction over that child. But other changes we've made, we used to say things like any two adults may adopt. Nevada, after the last session in Nevada, we can have more than two people adopt a child and be parents of a child. That is extremely, from not a private placement perspective, but necessarily, it helps in that too. But it really helps in the step parent scenario where you've got a step parent and there really is 3 people raising a child. We can bring that step parent in as an adoptive parent. And we're one of the few states that have gone that far. It's one of the first statutes that looks like that. So we're very cutting edge in Nevada when it comes to adoption. we have a lot of the same generic rules that a lot of states have. The adoptive parent needs to be at least 10 years older than the person they're adopting. That is really kind of looking more at rules where people, instead of getting married, they want to adopt. We've kind of worked around some of that stuff, but those are easy requirements, especially somebody looking for a placement of a young child with them. They're going to meet that requirement. One of the other big picture items is if the child's over 14 years of age, the child needs to consent to the adoption. At that point, we see them as having some autonomy, their children still. But if they're going to have a forever placement that late in their life, we want them participating in the conversation with the court. But big picture, Nevada is what we call an agency state. And so you'll go to some states where attorneys can do matching for a fee and do the adoption, and they can do interstate compact work. They can work on moving children between states. Nevada, you have to be a licensed agency to do most of that work. So the attorneys cannot. I cannot make money off of matching you. You do have to utilize an agency in order to do that matching. Now, if you find somebody on your own, you're fine. You don't need an agency per se, but you still have to have a home study. So I think we're going to go through some scenarios like that, some very specific scenarios versus me getting into it right now. And I'm talking about the big picture. But probably the thing to always remember and go back to with Nevada that's so unique is that agency state part of it. It takes attorneys out of a big portion of what's done, quite honestly. Very unique and very different from most states.
That is very unique and different. And you're exactly right. So the follow-up question to that is, if you are self-matching, how does it work? But before we dive into that, I think it might be helpful just so that we, kind of level set everyone, the different ways you could match in then the state of Nevada would be that you could work with an agency and they could actually match your adoption for you. And so that would look like you choosing an adoption agency and kind of following their steps and processes. And then when that adoption is ready to be finalized or at a certain other point throughout their process, they would engage the assistance of an adoption attorney to complete all of the legal steps. But then if you were working with an adoption attorney, you said adoption attorneys cannot match you, but then you can help them potentially in a self-matching or in an agency form if they've already found someone on their own. Is that correct?
Yeah, if they've already found someone, or they're just coming to me asking about what agency they should work with, I can help them with that. I can get them to an agency. Awesome. I just can't do what people think of with agencies, which is I can't put an advertisement out there for you, find somebody, take money from you for trying to match somebody. So if somebody came to me and said, I have a baby, I could tell a family about that, but I can't make any money off of that match. So I have to hands off if I do that. And it happens. I mean, I'm more, if somebody says, hey, I want to give my baby up and they know me and they trust me, I might, take some steps to say, well, I've heard of these families that are looking, but I can't make any money off of it. I can't do anything. I can't get too deep into it. But if they came to me and said, I found somebody, she wants to give up her baby, and then I can assist them. I can take them through the steps. I can't do the home study. I can't, if it's going to be an interstate placement, we still have to involve an agency for those two steps. But I can get them to the agency. I can help them. I can navigate them that direction.
That totally makes sense. So again, just as a level set, the typical process to your point is to get a home study, right? So you're working with a social worker, or if you're working with an agency, they're going to have someone that they suggest to use more than likely, and they're going to do all the necessary background checks and all of those things and deem your home, quote unquote, open for adoption, right? Meaning that you're kind of approved to be a hopeful adoptive family. And
Correct.
then you're going to go through kind of the matching process, either with an agency or on your own. And from an agency perspective, they're going to have certain services that they can provide to an expectant parent that maybe if you're working on your own, you're not going to have, right? Some social services, maybe some counseling services and things of that nature that, depending upon your adoption situation, may be really needed in that particular situation. Then, you're going to match with an expectant family and then go through the legal process aspect of it.
Yeah. So the general rule in the state of Nevada is that I'm going to use a word that no one's going to understand, but if you are within the third degree of consanguinity, that is we have this nice little chart that says what your family members, what degree of relationship they are to you. So your children are, the first degree of consanguinity. Your parents are within that first degree bubble of consanguinity. And then as you go out to aunts and uncles, great grandparents, and further out, the degrees go out. So in Nevada, if you are related to the person who is giving you wants you to adopt their child, then we would look at those degrees of consanguinity to decide whether you have to have a home study. But it's really, third degree is not very far out. So it's really close relationship. So most adoptions require a home study, quite honestly.
That makes sense. So say I am looking as a hopeful adoptive family to match on my own, meaning that I am sharing my desire to adopt in some, I'll call them freeways just for, easy conversation at the moment. Some things like maybe I'm sharing a flyer, in a laundromat. Maybe I'm sharing it with my hairdresser or my OB, or maybe I'm even putting it on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. Is if I'm self-matching and sharing my profile and desire to adopt in that manner, is that something that's allowed in your state?
You cannot advertise in the state of Nevada for placement or for finding somebody without being an agency. So that advertising, now we'll talk about the internet in a second because it's a different
beast.
It's a different beast. It's a different dimension. So the old school form of advertising, go to the radio, go to a TV station, put out flyers in the state, what we used to do for advertising. Absolutely. You've got to be an agency to do that. It's a misdemeanor if you advertise. What they're looking at is, the wording that we have is that if you advertise that you can place a child and it's really going after the people that say they can place. Mm-hmm. So the independents don't usually get hit hard, but I can't advise anybody, don't do it. It's just not a good idea. You might have some loopholes in our advertising rules because you're just an independent person, but it's not advisable to do it here. Now, on the internet part of things, we say that, child placing agency can include in an advertisement, and we say what they can and can't do. Now, internet is an exception to the rule because we can't control an internet advertising from coming into our state. There's no state boundary.
Yeah.
Line, right on the internet that says, whoa, Nevada, but if an agency was to to add Nevada, they could get in trouble if they're not licensed in Nevada. An independent person that just places it on the internet is not going to get in trouble in Nevada for doing that because you didn't walk into our state and advertise. Such a nuanced thing. I hate giving this to the general public this way because it sounds complicated, right? But we're pretty strict. I mean, Nevada's pretty strict, I guess, is the way to look at it on the advertising part of it. But you put a profile out there. And if you found somebody in Nevada by doing an internet profile, you're not necessarily going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
Really going after agencies that aren't licensed, that are advertising in the state, or individuals who try to facilitate matches. That's what they're going after in Nevada.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. I know I oftentimes have a lot of folks in my community that'll say, I'm creating a Facebook profile that's specific to adoption, and I'm just sharing it on Facebook or, Instagram or TikTok, right? That I'm hoping to adopt, and, I'm sharing information about my life. And I often tell people, I'm like, well, first you have to go and actually get a relationship with an attorney, create an attorney-client relationship there, right? Separate from what we're doing here, simply informational purposes here. But in that, they can advise in your state whether or not it's legal, because to your point, it is highly nuanced.
Right.
In most states, not in all, in most states, when you are creating a profile and sharing things basically for free, meaning you're not paying these social media platforms advertising dollars to put behind sharing your profile more often, in most states, then that becomes one of those gray areas. And most attorneys are like, in this state, it's okay. Or this state, no, stay far away from that. It's definitely not allowed.
Well, and so if somebody says to you, look, I'll help you find somebody to match with, I'm going to go, so it's not truly independent, but you're not working with an agency. It's not a lawyer, right? Yeah. And even lawyers, I can't do the advertising. It has to be an agency in the state of Nevada. But if somebody says, I'll go place ads for you, they're the one committing the misdemeanor. That's right. And that's what's not proper. They cannot go take money, try to match people in the state of Nevada through advertising, placement of ads, and charge you money for it without it being a crime in the state of Nevada. So. Yeah.
And that is really important, which is why for those in my group that are watching, when they ask me, will you place ads in this state? I'm like, nope, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. Nevada's a scary one. Nevada's a stay away state for that.
That's right.
I do think those statutes, I mean, this is esoteric, but I do think they're old fashioned. I do know, the edits and the changes to that have not been made currently. We haven't looked at it in a long time. And so there's some room for work there, but it's not there yet. So.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. And that is why, quite honestly, you'll see a lot of profile companies out there that'll say they'll help you build your profile, and then they'll teach you ways that you can share it, that you should then go and talk to an adoption attorney and make sure that you understand the laws in your state before you move into sharing it yourself, which is honestly the entire point of independent matching, is that you're doing some of the work and the work that you can do yourself to save yourself money. But I always recommend folks to not shortcut the support that expectant parents need, right? That's still really important. And that's the other aspect that agencies tend to provide that is different from the self-matching or the independent route itself.
Yeah. And agencies that are out there doing their own advertising, they're following the rules, or you're hoping they are, for each state, right? Mm-hmm. And you're not going to get in trouble for hiring somebody who is the one that committed the crime.
That's right.
That violated the law. So that's one thing to know. If you want to hire somebody, you're giving yourself a shield. But also, when you're doing, trying to do independent matching through the internet, it's a social beast, and you don't know where your child's going to, potentially come from, what state you're going to be in. And so, you can't just go hire a lawyer in every single state just in case you land accidentally with a child in one of those states, right? Yeah. So that's an impossibility for you. It's also the reason, our statute's more geared towards that not being a violation. That's not what we're going after. But
yeah. That totally makes sense. So we've touched on a lot thus far. So I want to kind of give a recap to make sure everybody's on the same page with us. So the general process when you are hoping to adopt in the state of Nevada is first and foremost making sure that you are home study approved. And then once you're home study approved, then you're moving into preparing to match, is kind of what I would call it, right? You're working on your profile, you're working on making sure you have all the right partners lined up, all of those types of things. And then you're going into the matching phase, and then ultimately into the finalization phase of the adoption once you've matched. And so obviously there's a bunch of nuances and little steps in between, depending upon the way you're, intending to match your adoption, but a high level, that's generally the process itself. So let's talk about some of the more specific legal questions that our audience typically has when we're trying to get a baseline understanding of the adoption laws in those states. Can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of putative father and kind of the whole birth father aspect of the adoption process in your state?
Yeah, so this is a weird time to be talking to you about it because we are hopefully moments away from adopting the new Uniform Parentage Act 2017 version in Nevada. I'm in the middle of lobbying it right now. So whatever I say today on this
could change before this airs.
I need everybody to be very cautious that Nevada is on the cusp of a dramatic change as to who is a parent and who is not a parent in the state of Nevada and ways to become a parent. So we do not have a putative father registry in Nevada. The UPA that Nevada is looking at will not have that. So some of you may be in states where you're familiar, where there's a registry with the state government for names to be registered on as potential parents. In Nevada, we do not have that. In Nevada, we have a very simplistic, old-fashioned version, quite honestly, at the moment, version of parentage in Nevada. It is the atypical, if you are, if you're genetically related to the child, you can be a father or a mother. If you are married to a woman who gives birth to a child, you are presumed to be a parent of that child. If you, I'm hesitating because we've got a lot going on right now. There's a lot of changes happening right now, but kind of the A standard type of stuff. We do not have a solid de facto parent, that's a very complicated legal term to give to people, but you held yourself out as a parent, thus you must be a parent statute. We do have that holding out language in assisted reproductive technology. And so right now, at the moment, we have to start with just looking at, is she married? And who is that person? Because we've got to give notice to that person if we're going to terminate them, whether they're genetically related to the child or not. There's a presumption of parentage there. We've got to look at the birth certificate and say, is there another parent on this birth certificate? And I'm not saying father, because in Nevada, we are so gender neutral with everything we've got. And we've got a lot of progressive ways for same-sex parents to be on birth certificates that there may be another parent on there through assisted reproductive technology. And so, but we look at the birth certificate. Is there another parent on there? Is there, isn't there? No. If there is, we got to give notice and we've got to work on terminating that parent. If there is not, then we are now talking to the genetic mother who gave birth to the child about what other potential parents there could be, and anybody she knows who potentially could be the parent of that child. Our courts, there's a million scenarios that arise with that, and that is in every single state. You've got different situations where potentially she says, well, it was a one-night stand and I don't know who he was, right? In that scenario, we've still got to quiz her and still got to see what information she might have that may still potentially lead to that person so we can terminate them. In terms of the future of Nevada, there's going to be a lot more to it. It's going to be much more sophisticated and a lot more procedural rules and ability for somebody to say, even though I'm married, I deny my parentage without having to have an actual termination of parental rights. That excites me. We're not there yet. I want that so bad. That's part of the Uniform Parentage Act, because often we're in these scenarios where someone's like, look, I'll do the genetic test, but I'm married, but I'm going to deny my parentage. I would love for him to be able to do that. But right now in Nevada, we got to do a full termination of parental rights of that person because of the presumption. So
that makes sense. Yeah, I know it is so very nuanced that it makes it hard to talk in generality.
It's hard to summarize it really fast, right? Yeah, it is.
It is.
But Nevada statutes, like I said, I call them old fashioned. I mean, they're just that original concept of what people thought of as parents are still in our statutes, and they haven't been updated except for the reproductive technology end of things. So we do have a simplified process for two moms to end up on the birth certificate. They don't have to have an adoption in order for there to be another mother on the birth certificate. So in that scenario, we've got to terminate that mother too. So
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah. So when it comes to another question that is asked really often, how does revocation and then ultimately finalization work in the state of Nevada? And can you also explain the difference as you talk about how or what those really mean in your state?
Yeah, so the genetic mother cannot terminate her parental rights through a consent until 72 hours after the birth of the child. There really is almost no revocation of that consent. It's got to be fraud or duress. I mean, somebody lied to her as what she was signing type of a thing. Yeah. Buyer's remorse is what I call it. That won't revoke that consent. We've got relinquishments and then we've got consent. So consent is a specific consent. So the bio mother or the genetic parent is signing a consent to specifically choose a family that they want their child adopted by, versus a relinquishment is to social services for abuse and neglect. Right. Basically, they're in a scenario where social services is going to take complete custody over that child, or the agency is going to take custody over that child without a specific placement. You're just saying, this is the best for my child. I'm not going to go seek which family I'm going to place my child with. And the agency can do that. The revocation of that for the birth mother is it's near impossible. It's been done and we've done it in scenarios where it's proper, but it's really, like I said, there was a lot of bad behavior at the hospital and a lot of duress and a lot of improper actions. On the father side of things, a genetic parent can consent to termination of their parental rights before the baby is born. We don't have to wait until after for that. If he's not agreeing to that, then we still have to wait until after the birth of the child to continue to pursue the termination of parental rights, the full case. We can start things ahead of time, but we just can't. It's not going to happen until after the birth of the child. He's got a few exceptions on being able to revoke his consent that he did before the birth of the child. And it has to do, it's surrounding, and I'm hesitating on this because this is all something, it needs to be changed in the law, but there's a serious equal protection problem here where mothers and fathers are not being treated the same in these scenarios. Yeah. But it has to do with if they get married after the birth of the child, and then that presumption almost kind of backpedals itself back into place. She doesn't have that benefit under her consent rules, but he does on revoking his. And so, you really it's a tight window. It's a very tight window under Nevada law. So once you get those in place, there's a lot of confidence level, a significant amount of confidence level. But when you don't have those in place, your confidence needs to stay in check until we can get the termination of parental rights done. If we can prove that they are unfit to be parents.
That makes sense. So then when it comes to actually finalizing the adoption, are there additional steps after the revocation period in order to finalize?
Barely. I mean, the only real steps are filing of the petition for adoption and setting a hearing. The court does require hearings in the state of Nevada, but bless COVID in some ways, because Zoom is our standard protocol for an adoption hearing these days. So you may or may not have to actually come into the state of Nevada for your hearing. Most likely not. And in fact, I think they're going to start making that a permanent decision unless people ask for an in-person adoption hearing, which we have people want because it's the pomp and circumstance of it and the joy part of it. But if, we've got people in other states and the child was placed in another state, we don't have to require you to come back to the state of Nevada for that hearing. But there is a 6-month rule for social services where they continue to monitor, and we cannot finalize the adoption until 6 months. That is different from a consent or a relinquishment, the ability to revoke those. You can't revoke a relinquishment, but a consent. The 6-month rule is not about that. It's about social services the child needs to be placed in your home for 6 months. And we need to see how the child thrives. Very, very honest with you. I personally don't even know of one where social services and that, because they've already done the home study. They've already decided you're a great placement. The child's in your home. Maybe you get busted for some major crime during that 6 months and they're going to take the child back, like human trafficking or something. You do something really bad. Yeah. Not a traffic violation. It's not going to be a parking ticket. But there is a possibility you could screw up in that 6 months, I guess, but I've never seen one. I've never seen it happen. It means something else got screwed up earlier on, probably that they didn't realize you weren't a good fit. Yeah. But the true finalization, we have to wait for that 6-month rule. We have some exceptions for the step-parent family related adoptions, the third degree consanguinity, that terrible word. We have some exceptions for that. We're also looking at messing around with that timeline too, but right now it's 6 months before we can finalize.
Okay. That's good.
Quite honestly, by the time you get that baby home, everybody's worked out all the kinks on everything. We file, we wait on the court's calendar before we ever can get on it. 6 months goes by quickly. It's not a big deal.
It does. It does for sure. So before we shift into assisted reproductive, if you're okay with talking about that, I just want to ask if there's any other, things that you think are really important for hopeful adoptive families to know if they're just starting out their adoption process when it comes to adoption law in your state.
For Nevada, no, not a whole lot more. I think the biggest thing is people get really upset when they call my office and I say, have you talked to an agency? I will talk to you. I will consult with you and help you, figure out what agency you want to go to. But when you're an independent match and you say, I'm not using an agency and I don't want to, you have to have that home study. I can't help you with that. I can't make a home study happen for you without the engagement of an agency. Now, when you talk to those agencies, it's important to say, hey, what's your fee for when you're matching somebody versus you're just doing the home study? Because you shouldn't be paying a full fee to an agency in Nevada if you self-matched. You should only be paying for those specific services that you're needing, which is the home study. You may need interstate compact assistance for placement of the child out of the state of Nevada between states. You most likely will if that's what you're doing, and unless you reside in Nevada. But for the services you need, get them to par it down and tell you what they're charging you for it, because you're not paying them to go match for you. So it should be a discounted rate. Unfortunately, home studies are probably, the cost of them is probably one of the most prohibitive items in adoption, in my opinion, especially if you're doing an independent match. Sure. We're looking at grant programs. We're looking at options in Nevada. Just know Nevada is trying. We're trying. We're looking at things that possibly we could do on that. We're not there yet, but you're gonna need to. You have to use them. I can't do anything about that. I'm very proud of you for finding somebody independently matching, thinking it's a great deal. Just remember, though, when you independently match, there's some things that you're going to need to do on your own, a little bit of investigative jobs to see what you're really getting into with this child. because you didn't have an agency give you the full background on that genetic parent who gave birth and what the scenario is. And when you independently match, the biggest missing element when you don't have an agency engaged yet, for me, is tell me about the other genetic parent. Tell me what you know. And they go, well, we don't know anything. And I go, well, you may be already in for trouble. And one of the things agencies do is go dig into that storyline, because we can't just tell the court we don't know. We have to tell the court more. We have to try more. So, but don't get frustrated that it still includes an agency just when it was an independent match. That's the hard part for Nevada.
Yeah, I will say, I feel like in the adoption industry as a whole, there are some really bad actors that have given, certain services a really bad name, right? Which I think has led to the kind of introduction, if you will, of independent matching and self-matching beyond just like the friend of a friend type of scenario, right? I think, that type of situation.
Sure.
Yeah, that's lasted for generations. Someone knows someone and then they've just kind of connected and then worked, to follow the state law in their particular state. But I fundamentally, I don't believe that all agencies are bad. I do believe that they do this work honestly because they understand how to navigate these difficult situations. And there's really a good benefit to agencies, but it's about finding the right agency. And if you can't find the right agency in your area, or you're just coming across these bad actors, then you can replicate the agency model yourself by pulling in different services, right? Again, based upon the law in your state, but you could bring in a social worker to help you, vet through and form relationships and get the right type of, background and teach you different things as it relates to getting social services. But and
you can do that in other states. You can't do that in Nevada. Our social workers, these agencies the social workers are under very specific criteria and background and experience, but you do have to hire them at the end of the day in Nevada. That's just the be all end all. I can't circumvent it. But you're right. Not all agencies are bad. Right. The bigger problem we have in Nevada is not the quality of our agencies. It's the number of them. We don't have, it's like when somebody has an independent match and I send them off and say, you've got to get your home study going. You're going to be so far behind if you don't, because timing of your home study helps. It can be a big problem. If you wait till the day the baby's born to start your home study, we're already behind the 8 ball big time. Yeah. And they call agencies and they're all busy and they're trying to get a home study. Then it's, if you do it now, that's my biggest advice to you. Do it now and have it in wait, because not hiring an agency to match does not avoid that part of it. So, and no, for the bad actors that are out there, that's the reason some of these strange laws get developed. And when you look at Nevada and go, gosh, dang, that advertising rule, it's like, well, something happened. They didn't just appear in our statutes for no reason. There was a storyline behind it.
Yeah. And it's ultimately to protect the hopeful adoptive families and the expectant families from these bad actors.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
So as we transition into just maybe a quick overview, of assisted reproductive technology law in your state, can you just tell us a little bit about how that works? Is it really talking about surrogacy? Is it really talking about embryo adoption or donation? Can you give us a high level overview of what that means for you?
Sure. And even, my adoption clients, a lot of times this is their dual consult that I have with them, which is, which direction should you go? Are you getting frustrated in the adoption world, or are you getting frustrated in the surrogacy world and you want to go the other direction? I think it's valuable for any adoption clients to just have the eye on the ball for both, and at least an understanding in case they ever need to switch directions. Assisted reproductive technology, we look at globally as anything having to do with genetic donations. So that's eggs, embryos, or sperm or surrogacy. That's kind of the two big bowls, or however you want to talk about it, that we talk about. When we're in the donation bowl, Nevada redid all of its reproductive statutes in 2013. So even though we don't have the new UPA, we have very, very modern, up-to-date reproductive statutes. I lobbied them. I drafted all of them. They're not, I'm responsible for all of them, but they, in any state, really, when you're talking about sperm donation, you're fine. Every state's got a good old fashioned sperm donation statute. We were able to freeze sperm before we knew scientifically how to freeze embryos or eggs. So those statutes exist everywhere. And if you're a donor and you have the intent to be a donor, then you're not a parent. And if you have the intent to receive it, you will be the parent of that genetic material if you utilize it. So if you're talking about donations and you need that, that doesn't mean you're necessarily looking at adoption also, because you probably can still conceive. Now, you may be looking at donor material for use in a surrogacy, but just in this picture of what we're talking about is people who can't conceive, who are trying to have a child. We're talking about the surrogacy bowl. And so when we talk about surrogacy in Nevada, we have a wonderful surrogacy statute. The biggest rules that you need to know is that you cannot use your surrogate's own genetic material. So you either need to use your sperm and eggs, or you need to use a donor's, but you cannot use the surrogates. Other than that, Nevada is wide open. You just need a contract before she becomes pregnant, before we do the embryo transfer procedure. Both sides have to be represented by an attorney. That contract has to be notarized, and there's a few requirements as to what goes into the contract itself. And then once you're pregnant, we go to the court, we prove to the court it's a real surrogacy, and the court enters an order that you're the parent upon the birth of your child. There is no revocation. She cannot take it back. She cannot change her mind. That is the biggest difference between it and adoption, other than the genetic part of it. But there is no, oh no, she could change her mind in those 72 hours after the birth of the child, right?
Yeah.
She can't. It's not her child. She'll never be able to change her mind. It's expensive. Surrogacy can be far more expensive than adoption. But if you have multiple failed adoptions and you add up those costs, it's not always more expensive than adoption, because the cumulative of it, right? Now, the big failure that can come in surrogacy is if she doesn't get pregnant, if the transfer doesn't work. And that happens, but not all the time. But reproductive technology is not cheap. Our docs are not cheap. I don't blame them. They're the most cutting edge area of medicine there is out there. So they have to stay more on top of it than any other area. But there's a big price point, but it's feasible. Usually the conversation I'm having is, like I said, failed adoptions, bio parents who, genetic parents. I'm trying to use the word genetic anymore because bio does not work in our statutes real well. Genetic parents changing their mind. They've been through the ringer. They can't seem to get matched with a child. They can't seem to find one. They're just getting frustrated, more and more frustrated, and trying to decide if they're going to switch gears to surrogacy. I think the better path is always, if there is any possibility that you may want to do surrogacy, that you look at it on the front end versus waiting till you've had all that money out there. Not everybody fails in adoption. Not all bio parents or genetic parents change their mind, but it is a viable alternative option for people. And Nevada is very progressive on it. Not all states in the U.S. are progressive in surrogacy. And there is a dramatic difference in the laws from state to state on surrogacy, more so than in adoption. Adoption, at the end of the day, the baseline of an adoption procedure isn't dramatically different, the steps and how you get there, but adoption's allowed in every single state, right? Surrogacy is not allowed in every single state. So there's your differences. But the big categories people should be looking at, if they're looking at the laws, which they should look at in adoption too, is whether it's gender specific, meaning whether you can have same-sex couples adopting or not, or whether you can have a same-sex couple utilize surrogacy or not, whether marriage is an element. Do two people adopting or two people utilizing surrogacy have to be adopted or be married? In Nevada, for both adoption and surrogacy, you do not have to be married. I can have two people adopt and not be married. I can have two people use surrogacy and not be married. But those are probably the biggest categories of what you're looking at from the difference of state to state to state. And if you are a opposite sex married couple, you're just not going to have that issue with adoption. You're going to be pretty darn safe everywhere you go. But if you fit in one of the other categories, unmarried, same gender, you need to be paying attention and for both categories. So
that makes sense.
Big generic bubble.
No, that's super helpful to have kind of a general understanding of both sides, if you will. I often tell my clients that I think they really should do their research on multiple methods of matching. And if they're specifically deciding adoption's the route, then they ought to consider, again, based upon the state law in their state, what are the different areas that you can use from trying to match, right? Can you work with an attorney and an agency in your state, or can you work, try to work with an agency, but also share it on your own, right? But I love your point that if you are considering surrogacy, you really need to spend the time and energy in researching that on the front side before you go into the adoption realm, because you're right. You can, end up spending as much in, adoption or private adoption, whatever you want to call it, if you're not careful, and, or even if you have failed adoptions that are just simply out of your control, that could definitely put you in the same price range very quickly as surrogacy as well.
Well, and genetics can be a big part of it. If genetics is important to you and you want some kind of genetic link between you and your child, surrogacy is going to be the only way you can go about that.
Yeah.
So it's an option that's out there. In the surrogacy world, we do not have licensing of agencies yet. Well, let me give an exception. New York has just passed a very massive rewrite of their statutes for that. But from a federal level and most state levels, every other state, we don't have a licensing mechanism for an agency. So we don't, in our world, we try not to call them agencies in surrogacy, because agency in the adoption world comes with a very specific connotation of the type of licensing that it has behind it. We call them matching programs on the surrogacy side of things, or we try to. I slip. I cannot get those words correct out of my mouth, because it's just agency is easier and faster to say than matching program. But just know that is another difference is, the adoption arena has developed for far longer in the law over much greater time period and is very concrete. And in the matching program world of surrogacy, it's new. It really is new. It's such a different mechanism, but it's a very successful mechanism that is growing by leaps and bounds in the United States. Not necessarily internationally, but we have a lot of international clients that come in to utilize surrogates in the United States. So
that's interesting. Well, thank you again for the breakdown of that. As we wrap up our conversation today, I just want to see if there's anything else you'd like for, hopeful adoptive parents to keep in mind as they begin their journey.
There's options. You can do it. Just stick to it. I get so many people that feel defeated or just too afraid because it's such a complicated system. But, resources such as your videos, and they're out there. There are resources. So just dig in and keep at it. You'll become parents. We'll get you there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where can our audience go to connect with you if they're in the state of Nevada or considering to adopt from the state of Nevada?
Quickest, easiest way is our website. It's www.lawyersforfamilies.com, and just to just go there. That's the easiest way. If you're already watching a video on the internet, I assume you can get there. So
we'll be sure to link it in the show notes as well to make it easy for folks to find you. But Kim, it's just been a phenomenal time connecting with you. I've learned so much in our conversation, and I really do appreciate everything you do for our community, and especially for the adoption community in the state of Nevada. We're really lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you too, and getting this information out for the public.
Yeah, thanks. Wasn't that amazing? I mean, who knew that you could actually self-match your adoption while staying legally compliant and using an adoption agency? That is so confusing, but so important to know, because you don't want to accidentally put your adoption opportunity in jeopardy or be less efficient in your adoption journey because you don't properly understand the steps in that state. Speaking of understanding the steps and being efficient in your adoption journey, if you need help, head on over to myadoptioncoach.com/program so you can learn more about how we can work together in your adoption journey step by step. Remember, my friend, you are worthy of support, and I'm just a message away. I'll see you soon, friend.